By our own exertions, we must rise. Let us labor diligently, educate ourselves, and show the world our worth, and the barriers of prejudice will begin to fall. William Wells Brown, American abolitionist, novelist, playwright, and historian. All right. Good evening. What's going on here? Well, as it turned out, this morning I first woke up late. And funny enough, the reason that I woke up late is because I decided to stay up late watching a movie. But here's the thing. I spent my whole weekend doing a whole bunch of work, right? Every day is work for me. I've got something going on. I'm working on a property, I'm doing my yard, I'm working on my house, working on the podcast, something. There's just something. I have a normal job. So I'm constantly busy. Like I don't remember. Well, I do remember it. I think it was last weekend. I think I said I was like, it rained out and I couldn't do this job that I was going to do outside. And so I ended up just spending the day inside with my son, and we, did some things, played Minecraft, whatever. And um, so that Saturday stands out is like the first Saturday in like months where I literally did nothing. So, but beside that, that generally doesn't happen. So what I decided, I was like, man, I want to watch this movie. But the funny part about watching this movie, it was actually still research for the podcast. So I still wasn't even doing it out of leisure. And I'm not going to tell you what it is because I'm working on something and I don't want to spill the beans just yet for a number of reasons. Number one, sometimes I'll dig into something and then I'll find out like, that's not it's not really what I thought. Like I'll have this notion in my mind. I go digging and I go, just look and see if something is what I think it is. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time. And so I watched a movie and then I got to follow up and watch a documentary and then do a little bit more research. But I think what I want to utilize that for is going to work. So just hold tight on that. So I stayed up late and then I ended up getting up late and then I woke up and man, I tell you what, I was in this weird funk like for the first half of the day. And today, I think, is the first day that I have been full on keto. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if you're familiar with being in keto, it is a metabolic state. So it takes time to get into. And then once you get into it, well, there's something called the keto flu, which is just basically your body trying to adapt to this new metabolic state. And then once you get over that hump, you're good to go. So I think that's where I am. And I'm like, I was working on the show this morning and I was like, I was just like staring. I was like, I can't think. And I was like, and it was very difficult. And I was like, how is this podcast going to go? And then my son also woke up late. And so then I was busy trying to get him ready and scramble. Because if you have kids, you know that any 5-minute task is like a 10 or 15-minute task when it comes to children. So, so we had to deal with that. So anyway, all that being said, got delayed, but I still wanted to do a show and I just couldn't pull myself together by the noon hour to do it during my lunch. So I was like, all right, I'll just do it after I bring my son back from jujitsu. And here we are. So boom. So the other thing is that I actually intended to discuss the recent SCOTUS ruling, the Supreme Court of the United States. However, more information keeps coming out. And I'm like, all right, I would like to include that or at least review it and see if I need to include it. So the one that I was talking, like I mentioned it I think over the weekend. I was like, yeah, Monday morning I'm going to do this. And then Monday got all jacked up. Like if this was Office Space, I would be having a case of the Mondays. And hopefully I don't get my ass kicked for saying that. Anyway, we should be back tomorrow with our regularly scheduled program. We'll be good to go. All right, so let's get into this. Let's talk about reparations. Hopefully I don't get in trouble with people. This is a touchy topic. right? Like, because like all the people that are opposed to it are like really opposed to it. They're like, "Rah!" And all the people that support it are like, they really support it. And here's the thing, the knee-jerk reaction for libertarians and even conservatives is to yell something like, taxation is theft, which it is, and then insist that any taking of money from one person and giving that to another is immoral. And then that's the end of the conversation. And I agree with those things, but that's just not sufficient. And you might, well, why is it not sufficient, DL? Because this idea is not like some new idea. It's an idea that's existed for a long time. Well, it's at least existed since the promise of what, 40 acres and a mule. That's reparations. It's like, hey, you were treated horribly, you know, you deserve some sort of reparation. You deserve something for your trouble, right? Like that's basically what it is. So this idea hasn't gone away since then, and it's grown stronger. So I think it is time to just address it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate a fair portion. I don't want to say that. I want to evaluate some of the body of information. I'm going to do it through a bill review. Now, look, I cannot address everything. Otherwise, this show would be like hours and hours long. So what I'm going to do is I just narrowed it down to things to information that I think is value add in addressing this idea of reparations. And we're going to address it. We're going to step away from the taxation is theft. We're going to step away from the idea that, hey, if you take money from one person and you give it to another, that's immoral. In the most ideal world, that's all you need to say. And then the idea is done. It collapses and we move on to the next crappy idea. However, in the real world, ideas have justifications, they have arguments, they need to be addressed. So that's what I'm going to do. So let's start. We're going to dive into this. It's House Resolution 414, but and this is the reparations now, and so we're going to dive into that. Let's start with an article. Let's just let's kind of ease our way into it a little bit. So this is an article from the Hill. I'm going to read through it. Let's give you kind of like a lay of foundation, and then we're just going to kind of get more into this. So Democrats reintroduce federal resolution for reparations. Okay. And this is Representative Summer Lee. A coalition of Democratic lawmakers and advocates on Thursday reintroduced a resolution to offer reparations to descendants of enslaved Africans and people of African descent. Representative Summer Lee, Democrat out of Pennsylvania, led the reintroduction of the Reparations Now resolution, which was first introduced in 2023 by former Representative Cori Bush, out of a Democrat out of Missouri. We're here to say that there's no more waiting, no more watering down, no more putting justice on layaway, said Lee, the descendant of enslaved Africans. Black folks are owed more than thoughts and prayers. We're owed repair, we're owed restitution, and we're owed justice. Okay, we're going to talk about some of that. The resolution calls for the federal government to allocate trillions of dollars in reparations to Black Americans to atone for chattel slavery, Jim Crow, and the ongoing effects of other federally sanctioned discriminatory policies. Okay. When we're talking about trillions of dollars, there's a conversation to be had. And so if you are a Black person and you are watching this show and you're already kind of bristling with irritation at me, I want you to just think about this. This is asking to spend trillions of dollars. Nobody spends trillions of dollars without having some serious conversations. Okay. And so like, if that's your ask, if you are on the side of reparations, if that's your ask, buckle up, Buttercup, because there's going to be a lot of debate and a lot of conversation because you want to spend trillions of dollars. Okay. I mean, look at Doge. Doge just started out or when Doge started out, it was going after like 15 million here, 10 million there, a million here. And people were like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So if people were cheering a few $1,000,000 being pulled, like they're going to be seriously concerned about trillions. Whether it could be 10 trillion, it could be 5 trillion, it could be 1 trillion, it could literally be a half a trillion. It doesn't really much matter. If the T word is anywhere close, people are going to want to have a conversation. If the B word, billions, is anywhere close, they're going to want to have a conversation. Because at the end of the day, we're happily removing millions from the equation. So when you make this big ask, roll up your sleeves. It's going to be a long conversation. All right. So let's continue on. For over 400 years, this country has profited off the stolen labor, the stolen land, and stolen lives of Black people, said Bush, who attended Thursday's press conference. Now, this is my first pushback here. Number one, this country is not an entity. It is. I mean, like United States of America is this entity, right? But the United States of America in itself does not have money that it owns. I have money. You have money. My neighbors have money. Your neighbors have money. The government only gets money when it takes it from people. Okay? So what that means is when we're talking about profited, we have to be more specific than this country, because this country includes a whole lot of things, some good, some bad. I mean, you could argue in some way that this country profited off of 2 nuclear bombs being dropped on Japan. DL, how could you? That doesn't even make any sense. It does when you think about it. Because one of the arguments that was made is that if we went in there, instead of dropping 2 atomic bombs, if we had went in there, we would have suffered many, many thousands, maybe even millions of loss of life. So that life got to come back and continue on, right? So the action there contributed to people being able to come home to their families or start a family, and therefore benefit from the things that they could do, the fact that there were people to do things, right? Like that's a benefit. If I come home and then I meet a nice woman, like I'm in World War II, I come home because I didn't have to go to the front lines of Japan. I come home and then I get to build a family. My family and I and my descendants will benefit on the very fact that I came home, which is part of the argument here, right? Part of the argument is like some Black people, they didn't make it out of slavery, whether they died of age or disease or whether they died through violence. They didn't make it. So the families that would have been able to been created did not, at least not from those particular people, right? So you see how the logic's working here? All right, let's continue on. She continued, from the first shackled bodies brought to these shores and those that didn't make it to the shores, to the grueling, back-breaking, murderous work done on plantations that built America's wealth, to the federal officials who enslaved human beings while they wrote our laws, even here in this building. America has been cashing checks written in Black blood. Look, let me just say this. America has been, every country for the most part, but we'll just talk about America. America has been cashing checks written in blood of virtually every person on every group of people on this planet. Not every person specifically, but almost every group of people, unless it's some tiny little tribe on some remote island that does not get any people and they have not left and we have not visited them, chances are the United States has cashed checks on the suffering of Black people, white people, Chinese, Japanese, and every other country that we've gone into and helped build, right? By first going to war with them. So let's not pretend like like checks written in Black blood is exclusive to one group. No, it's all over the place. Because that's unfortunately the reality of history. History, when you look back and you see what has been done, mankind is a nasty creature, or can be. They have the capacity for greatness and good things, but they also have the capacity for some of the most vile things that you could imagine, and even some things that you could never imagine. Lee and Bush on Thursday specifically pointed to the Trump administration's attempts to limit diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, including Trump's recent efforts to nullify a key component of the Civil Rights Act. Now, I'm not going to get into the Civil Rights Act because that's not what this bill review is about. But I will point out that diversity, equity, and inclusion are new. And one of the things that Black folk love telling people about, and they should, is about Black excellence. And there is a huge body of Black excellence that long predates diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, long before it. And we're going to talk about some of those. But I just want to point that out. Like this idea, like, oh, we need DEI. Have you looked at history lately? Like history is full of greatness, even when there was vile behavior, still filled with greatness. The harms done to enslaved Africans and subsequently their descendants for generations to follow are innumerable, but they are well documented, traceable, and persistent, said Lee. So I mostly agree. I think the persistent is a little bit that is doing some heavy lifting in today's age, particularly when we compare back to the way things were. But I otherwise don't disagree, right? Like I agree. Like the anytime you have somebody as a slave, you are an immoral, terrible, vile person. Anytime. If that person is a slave to you against their will, like if they're an indentured servant or something, if we're looking back in indentured servant where somebody willfully, different story, that's not what we're talking about. If you enslave somebody against their will, you are an immoral, evil, vile person. Period. Just going to leave it at that. All right, since Trump took office in January, members of the Congressional Black Caucus have introduced multiple pieces of legislation to recognize the nation's history of slavery and discrimination. Okay? I don't agree with this. I think that legislation should be actively doing something and it should be solving a problem. And in most cases, the problem probably can be solved without legislation. People tend not to believe so, but that's what these bill reviews are for. So I can look at legislation and say, here's a way where we could solve this issue, if there is even an issue, without using legislation. All right. In March, Senator Cory Booker, New Jersey, introduced bipartisan legislation to establish a monument recognizing the historically Black Greenwood District, which was burned to the ground in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Now, I have not seen this legislation. I will say this. If people want a monument, I'm okay with that. However, it should be paid for out of donations. And I don't care if it's a monument to the Civil War for either side, for Black folk, for Japanese Americans, for whomever, Chinese, it doesn't matter. If you want some sort of monument, make sure that it's paid for through voluntary means. Now, if you want, like, say, the city to do a resolution which has no enforceability, if you want them to pass a resolution saying, hey, we're going to designate this plot of land for a memorial to so-and-so who was a really great add to our city. We're not paying for it. All we're doing is dedicating this plot of land and this being donated. The money's already been raised. The government will not at any point pay for this. The only thing they're going to do is designate this piece of land. I will probably be okay with that. More than likely. Don't have a problem with that. I think the idea of monuments in a community, particularly monuments that are related to the community, are a good thing. I'm okay with this. Life would be bland if it was literally just a whole bunch of stores, shopping centers, and homes and factories. I think it's good to have parks and monuments and things like that. But my stomach for what I think the American people, the citizens of this country, should be paying for is very, very, very tiny. Like, if you can see how tiny I've got my fingers here, right? It's that tiny. Let me back it away so it's even more difficult for you to see. You see? Very, very tiny. That's how much I'm not entirely opposed to taxes. We're not going to get into that. That's a long conversation for another day where I stand on that matter. I still hold that taxation is theft. But if you want some tax dollars, number one, I want it to be local. Number two, I want it to be something that's reversible, so on and so forth. So there's some criteria that I basically have where I say, this is probably tolerable. Okay. All right. Earlier this month, Representative Ayanna Pressley and Booker led the reintroduction of H.R. 40, which would create a federal commission to examine the lasting impact of slavery, systemic racism, and racial discrimination. It would also explore measures such as reparations to address these harms. So I have a video from when I actually reviewed H.R. 40 like 3 years ago. It was back in episode 38. We're on episode 509 now. So I did this. I did this bill review. That was when bill reviews, when I was like much wiser and I was making them much shorter. Now I just run my mouth, and you guys indulge me by listening. So, and I appreciate it, by the way. But I'm gonna play that video for you. It's like a 6-minute video. And so we'll get to that in a little bit here. Presley on Thursday condemned Trump's efforts to limit DEI in federal institutions, including threats to defund the Smithsonian. So again, I think we should defund pretty much everything. Okay, it's not the American taxpayer's job to pay for things. I have much better uses for the money that's being taken from me than necessarily a Smithsonian. Now, if somebody is very wealthy and they want to donate to upkeep and maintain the Smithsonian, or get it started and then allow the Smithsonian to charge money, whatever, that would be fine. Now, if a local community would like to pay for, well, then we can have that conversation about taxes. But I should not be paying my taxes for somebody else's enjoyment in some other city or some other state. All right. So we are in a moment of anti-Blackness on steroids, and we refuse to be silent, said Presley, adding that Congress has an obligation to right the wrongs of slavery and discrimination. You know what's interesting about this conversation? You've got Representative Presley. You've got Representative Summer Lee. You've got Representative Crockett. You have Senator Cory Booker, and there's a long list of other Black folk who are in Congress. They were elected by people, and not just Black people. There are not enough Black people in this country to vote in the members of Congress that are Black. Had to be some white people too. So I think we should tone down the language here of anti-Blackness on steroids, because I don't think it's true. That's a conversation for a different day. I don't have time to go into that. We're talking about this bill here. We will not back down in our pursuit of racial justice, she said. The antidote to anti-Blackness is to be pro-Black, and we will do it unapologetically. The United States government owes a debt, and we need reparations now. All right. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about whether you actually need reparations, because I'm going to make the case that you don't. Efforts to establish the reparations for slavery have been ongoing since the end of slavery. Many advocates have pointed to General William Tecumseh Sherman's Special Field Order Number 15, commonly referred to as 40 acres and a mule. But the directive, which ordered Confederate land seized in Georgia and South Carolina to be split among formerly enslaved Black people in those states, was never carried out. However, white slave owners were compensated for the loss of their land following the end of the Civil War. Okay? Facts. Those are facts. The question is, in 2025, is it still appropriate to go back 100 years or so and say, well, based on this thing that nobody is alive to have even experienced, we need to create reparations? And we're going to address this reparations. We're going to address other groups that have allegedly received reparations. In 1989, former Representative John Conyers introduced H.R. 40 for the first time. He would continue to reintroduce this bill each session for 3 decades. Conyers died in 2019. That same year, the NAACP released a resolution detailing the lasting harms of slavery and discrimination and called for federal reparations, including a national apology. Now, what's very interesting about this resolution that was released by the NAACP is there's a lot of conversation about history and we don't know and we need to study this and blah, blah, blah. We're going to get into some of that. But I want you to keep in mind that all these organizations and all this information that it's already out there, when people say, well, we need to study this, we need to learn this, we need to educate people. I want you to just kind of think about all the information that's already out there and why does the government need to do it? Why does the government need to do something that that organizations are already doing or people are already doing. I mean, how many books have been written about this? How many movies? How many documentaries? Right? Like, this is galore. Like, and especially with the internet. Like, are you telling me that you can't get on the internet and go down a so-called rabbit hole, if you will, and then just learn and learn and learn about Black history and then learn some more and then learn some more? And then are you telling me you can't just create a podcast and say, this is going to be the podcast about Black history? And we're just going to put it all together and we're going to talk about it so that people will know. Of course you can. Right. So just keep that in mind. In 2021, Evanston, Illinois became the first city to create a reparations plan for Black residents. Other states have since followed, including California and Maryland. Okay. Is there a mass migration to California? Or better yet, are Black people in California like, man, this rocks? Or in Evanston, Illinois, are they like, man, I tell you what, this is the best thing since sliced bread? We basically have Black Wall Street 2.0. Right? Is that what's happening? No. We're literally having a conversation saying, we got to do this at the federal level. Right. And they'll point to these, but what is the actual effect? What is the impact? Are there better students? Are the Black folk in those cities and states, are they doing better financially? Is there any way that we can measure and say, wow, compared to what you were, the situation that you were in, things have really, really improved for you? No. Reparations are a proposal to level the playing field. I hate that term. This idea of leveling you can never, ever level the playing field. Let me put it to you this way. I was born in a family with my mom, and then she left my dad, and then not my biological, but my adoptive dad, who I just call dad. He met my mom. They got together. He ended up adopting me, and since I was 3 years old, he's been my dad. And then they had 2 more kids, my sister and my brother. Okay, we're all different. We were raised in the same home with the same finances, the same rules, the same love and attention, although I got my ass beat more, but by the same parents, right? And yet we have all turned out differently, not in a bad way, just different. Like if you looked at each one of us, you would say, wow, like there may be some foundational things that are the same, but my brother and my sister have more college education than I do. Okay. I just for one point, like there's a bunch of points that we could get into, but the point being, you cannot level the playing field because people are different. They respond differently to different environments. The fact that my sister and me, just for an example, have turned out so differently, and again, not in a bad way. We've just turned out differently. Okay. That kind of tells you that even though we had the same playing field, there are still things that played out differently. It gets worse when you talk about families where one sibling goes on to do great things and the other sibling goes on to be a crackhead or an alcoholic. If I remember correctly, Trump had a brother that was an alcoholic and died because of it. So they were raised in the same house. One became a billionaire and went on to go and become the president, and the other one died of alcoholism. My dad, he had a brother, and his brother was an alcoholic, died as a result of his alcoholism. Many families have that story. Now, sometimes the playing field is a little different for them. Maybe a parent will prefer one child over the other, but in many cases, the parents have given, as far as observation is concerned, the same amount of love and attention and care to all of their children, and yet some of them turn out radically different. You can look at any number of things. My dad and my mother, and I think my brother and my sister as well, they're all Republicans. I am not. I am a libertarian, like the black sheep of the family. I mean, in a positive way. But we turned out differently. Like, despite the fact that I was raised in a Republican household, I ended up going on to become a libertarian, right? And many people have that experience. They have a sibling, that was in the family that's entirely different politically, and culturally, like in terms of their views. Like, people respond differently even to the same environment. So you can never level the playing field, ever. The idea that we can needs to be dumped in the trash and tossed out. Let's continue. But the only way we could have ever leveled the playing field is by remedying the harms that have done by the system. No, you can't. Because number one, you can't undo it. Let's put it this way. Let's take, let's assume a woman has been abused by her father. No amount of remedies after the fact will undo that experience. And that experience will live with her for as long as she lives. Now, she may be able to go on and get past it enough so that the outside world is oblivious, but it will go with her to her grave. I know this because I watched it from my own mother. My mother was abused, and then she had some bad boyfriends. And then she met my dad, who was a great man, and he treated her fabulously. And despite that, she never fully got away from the history that she personally experienced. Okay. So, Lisa, see, we need real concrete action. We need policies that close the racial wealth gap, eliminate Black maternal health disparities, fund education, address environmental racism. I don't even know what environmental racism is. Like, is the environment, are the geckos, are the lizards that are running around all over Florida, are they racist? Yeah, I'm mocking her a little bit because environmental racism is something that people do. You don't have environmental, the trees, the ants do not engage in racism. The dogs, the cats, they're not racist. People are racist. I can't, these legislators kill me. We need reparations. It's a moral obligation, the debt that this country owes. So that's the end of the article. All right. And so now what I want to do is I want to get into the resolution. Now, the resolution, I have to take it a little bit easier because it's 25 pages. We're not going to read through the whole thing. And the reason that I'm going to take it a little bit on the easier side, click. See, that's not what I wanted to click. The reason I want to take it a little bit on the easier side is because number one, it's 25 or 24 pages. And the first like 22 and a half pages are whereas clauses. That's it. Whereas clauses. And if you've watched this show, you know that a whereas clause just basically sets the stage for, okay, what is the rationale for this bill? Now, I could walk through every single whereas clause and give you my perspective, but that would be bloody boring. So what I did was I just randomly picked them out. I didn't like, there's no agenda. I mean, I'm sure some people won't believe me, but I randomly picked them out and we'll just walk through and see what we learn or what we can ascertain from some of these whereas clauses. So let me put this up on the screen here. All right. House resolution. Now, this came from Representative Summer Lee's website. This was before it actually had a number. So it is actually 414. So if you go to Congress, it's House Resolution HRES 414. That's the one that you'll be looking for. But I was able to grab the copy that predated getting a number. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to some pages that I have documented because as you can see here, it says it just dives right in. So whereas, it's just there's a whole bunch of whereases for 20 some pages. And again, I'm not going to address them all because that would be absurd. So let's go to the first one here. Man, when I move this, it's going to. All right. So there we go. All right. Let's skip down to, and I've got them highlighted for me. So whereas more than 1,700 United States congressional members who served in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries had enslaved Black people, including the first woman elected to the United States Senate, Senator Rebecca Latimer Felton. Now, since they pointed her out, I just looked her up because I was curious. Senator Felton died in 1930 at the age of 94. She died almost 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago. And this is who we're talking about. Again, my point being, we're trying to force people today to pay for what people of yesteryear did. That's immoral. It would be no different than if a black person were to break into my home, steal my stuff, and I found some other black person and said, "You got to pay for this." It's no different. You're making the person who you're making somebody who is let me close that in a little bit, because I'm sure some people go just some random. Let's say that a black father is down on his luck. He breaks into my house, he steals some of my stuff, he sells it, and then he goes and he buys some birthday toys for his child. Okay? Still stealing, right? It's still theft, but at least there's some semblance of like we can kind of understand why somebody might do that. Okay? And if I were to say, okay, this black father broke into my house and stole my stereo and some other expensive stuff, and he sold it for his 12-year-old child to have a birthday. It would be this what is happening, what we're seeing here on the screen would be no different than saying that child owes me money. No, they don't. They did not steal from me. Their dad did. And should I be able to collect? Like, hey, that's my stuff. If there is a stereo, perhaps. If there's actual stuff that is actually mine, then perhaps. A lot of details go into that. How long ago was it? Blah blah blah. Right? Different. There's things that go into this. But in theory, if I were to get something back, it would have to be something that I already owned. But if he sold it and then he bought the kids, his child, a video game system for their birthday, yeah, I think it would be immoral for me to say, well, I get to have that PlayStation, right? I think that would be immoral to do that. Now, should the father have to repay me? Yes. Yeah, that's a different story. And if the father has to sell it, well, that's his problem, right? But do you see where I'm going here? We have to keep this separation of who is the actual guilty party. Because I don't think that people that are looking at this and saying, well, you should pay for what somebody did 100 years ago, I don't think that they realize just the can of worms that they're opening up. So this is one. All right. What's the next one? We're going to go over to page 8. So we'll go to page 8. And of course, these are always going to shift on me. That's okay. We'll just move down. See, there's a whole bunch of them and I can't address everything. Whereas slavery did not legally end until 1865 with the close of the Civil War. So that was 160 years ago. Nobody alive suffered from slavery, and nobody alive even personally knows anyone who experienced slavery. Now, you might have slaves in your lineage, right? It's possible that somebody that, like a great, I don't know exactly how far back they'd have to go, but you might have like a great great grandfather that you can trace through ancestry or, just through family records. And you could trace it back and say, I had somebody in my family that was in slavery. That's possible, but nobody alive has suffered. So again, we are asking people to pay for something. We're asking a group of people who did not commit any crimes to pay people who did not experience slavery. You're at like it's even worse than my contrived story with the black father and the child and the birthday gift. Because now we're looking at it like, okay, imagine my neighbor has his house broken into by a black man who's trying to get some money for his child's birthday. And then I say, well, your child should give me that stuff because it was stolen anyway. And I could concoct any kind of story that I want. Well, the neighbor, now they had to they had to pay for the damage to the house. They had to rebuy some of their stuff, whatever. And because they had to put out those expenditures, They were actually planning on buying something from me, but now they're not buying it. So I'm losing out, right? Do you see the stories that we could concoct? We could just keep making up any old story so long as we're getting away from the perpetrator and the victim. Those are the people where restitution needs to come into play. All right, let's go to the next one here. So we're on page 8. Let's go to page 10. We're just going to work our way down the line. And again, I'm just skipping past a whole bunch of these. Whereas white supremacists deputized by Tulsa officials raided, mobbed, massacred, and completely burned down nearly 40 city blocks of Tulsa's Greenwood district, a self-sustaining black economy, also known as Black Wall Street, in 1921. So, according to some estimates, $200 million of property damage occurred. However, the real problem is estimating future loss would be impossible. Why? Because let's do this. Let's say that I came into a lump sum of money. Let's say that some distant family member passes away and they knew who I was. They've been watching my podcast. They're like, man, this is a great show. I love what he's got to say, yada, yada. And when I die, I'm going to bequeath my wealth to DL and hopefully he does something great with it. And then let's say I get this wealth and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. I'm rich. And then I go and blow the money on stupid things. Okay. I just waste it. Well, guess what? My son and any descendants thereafter do not benefit from that wealth. On the other hand, it's possible that I get this great wealth and I wisely invest it and I make certain moves. Maybe I invest some of it, I take some others, and I invest maybe in some stocks and, long-term assets. And then I also invest in the business and, I quit my job. I write a nice email and I say, well, it's nice working for you, but turns out I just came into, millions and millions of dollars. So I'm going to go and try to do my own thing. And so then I invested in podcasting. And let's say that I blow up really big and I create a nice podcast empire. Lots of people listen to me. I'm making tons of money. And that money also goes toward giving some to my son as an heir. And then his kids would benefit from that. So that's possible too. Both stories are possible. It's possible that I waste it. It's possible that I do something with it. It's possible that I earnestly try to do something and just fail. And then I end up not giving him anything. Not because I wasted it out of foolishness, but because I made some bad calculations. So this idea that we could look back to something that happened literally 100 years ago, just a little over 100 years ago, and we could even calculate what the inheritance and the wealth would have been for the families that came out, there's no way. Because you don't know what people would have done with that money. You don't know what families would have come about from that money. Like, we don't know if somebody who is living today that's a descendant of somebody that lived in Tulsa's Greenwood district. We don't know if that person is, say, happily married with one kid, but had things played out differently in Tulsa. They could be happily married with 10 kids and doing very well for themselves. We don't know that. We don't know what we don't know what somebody in between could have created with the wealth that came from a parent who did very well in Tulsa. We have no idea. We could speculate. We could compare to other places and things like that. We could do some estimates, but we will never, ever know. So that's your first problem. Then the second problem is, again, this was 100 years ago. If I remember correctly, oh no, it's right here in the second one. I don't have it highlighted, but I'll just point it out. Whereas the Tulsa Race Massacre is the most documented race massacre in the history of the United States, and yet the two known living survivors, Leslie Benningfield Randall and Viola Ford Fletcher, both over 100 years of age, as well as descendants of the massacre, have yet to receive comprehensive reparations and justice. Now, if you said, DL, would they be eligible for some sort of reparations? Maybe, because they lived there. They would be the actual victim, not a descendant of a victim, but the victim. But of course, you're going to have to figure out who's the perpetrator. Where are we getting this money from? If you just take it from the government, you're basically taking it from me. And I'm going to tell you right now, I sure as hell am not going to somebody else's neighborhood and participating in burning it down. In fact, depending on the situation, I might be willing to fight against those people. So, what the people that support this bill would be telling me, if you want to take from the government, which is basically taken from the people, you are taking from people that might have been willing to fight on your behalf. And I have stepped in. I have stepped in on the behalf of other people. In fact, I'll tell you a quick story very, very quickly. Back in episode, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look up my episode here real quick. So let's see here. Um, where is it here? Oh, I bet it's down at the bottom here. Let me look. I'm looking for it. Where is it? Episode 321. I think it's episode 321. That was my episode where I invited Maj Touré of Black Guns Matter onto my show. Now, inviting him on the show is not necessarily helping people in itself necessarily. But he came on the show to talk about an incident where I almost got into a fight with another dad. It was a black man. And the reason I almost got into a fight with this black man at the park is because he was berating a black woman. So the story is that I was at the park with my son. He's playing. There's two other black women there. They had a bunch of kids playing. I think there was three. There were three other black women there. And there was a black dad that was sitting in the parking lot over at his car. And then one of the woman's children knocked over another woman's child. And that child was like 3 years old. He bumped his head, had a little egg on his head. And the dad came over. The mom was like, all right, we're leaving. And, the mom of the child that got hurt was like, we're leaving. The mom of the child that did it was like, look, it was an accident. We're sorry. He'll probably be okay. And chances are he probably would have been fine. So then the dad comes over and he's yelling and screaming and he's throwing a big fit. He's cussing and carrying out. And it seemed to me like it might get violent, physically violent. So at first my inclination was time to leave, not interested in violence. I don't like violence, but I'm not afraid of it, right? There's a time and a place for it, but I try to avoid it the best I can. But then I looked around and I was like, it's a man. There's only women here. I can't leave. And my son is way on the other side of the park. He's at a safe distance. So fine, I will just sit here and observe. And then eventually I got tired of observing and I opened my big fat mouth and I told the man to knock it off. Not really like that, but we got into a big shouting match. He's face to face, nose to nose, screaming and yelling at me. Like I showed my wife my glasses later. I was like, look at all the spit that's on my glasses. And she was like, that's so gross. And it was, right? But I was prepared to get into a physical fight with this man in defense of a black woman, right? So I can say, yes, I might have been willing to go over and stand on behalf of black people if white people are trying to destroy and massacre a whole city, or not a whole city, but I mean a whole district. I would have been willing, potentially. Again, situations vary, you don't know, but my past behavior says it's not off the table. And yet, somebody's like, well, DL, you should pay money. No, I shouldn't pay money. I shouldn't pay money for something that I had no part of. I shouldn't pay money given the fact that I actually do things to help out my fellow Americans, whether they're white or black or Asian. Doesn't matter. I try to help out my fellow man and woman. All right, let's go on. Let's see what else we got here. So this was this one, page 13. So we'll skip on over to 13 here and let's go down. Oh, this is an easy one, I think. Yeah. Whereas the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, established the counterintelligence program, also known as COINTELPRO, in 1956, with one of its major goals to target black activists fighting for self-determination, reparations, and racial justice. Well, here's how I fix that problem. Abolish the FBI. Done. Done. There's no need to do anything else out. It can't do anything dastardly like that. By the way, I object to the idea of COINTELPRO. Even though I disagree with reparations, I support every black person in this country saying, I want to go out and I want to organize and I'm going to try to convince my fellow man that we need reparations. If that's you, I support your right to do that. I'm just going to tell you no. Okay. So the idea that we would even need some 3-letter agency to intervene is absurd. And then to like the self-determination and the racial justice and anything else that they did, I object to all of that. So shut it down. Done. All right. That's how I solved that problem. I didn't even don't spend no money. In fact, we're saving money. We'll save money by shutting it down. Done deal. Like now you can have some of the money back that was taken from you. If you're a Black American and you pay taxes, I want you to have your tax money back, the money that you worked hard to earn. Right? Right now, I'm giving it to you. Shut the FBI down. Stand with me, shoulder to shoulder. We'll shut it down together. I mean, we probably won't because, it's a little bit harder than that, but we can fight for it. All right, what else we got? Let's see. Oh, let's go back up a little bit here. All right, so here's this one. All right, page 14. Yes, whereas Black people are still presumed dangerous and therefore are systematically targeted and criminalized under our legal system, including through the war on drugs, mandatory minimum sentencing laws, the prosecution of children as adults, and the disproportionate targeting, stopping, and arresting of Black people by law enforcement. Well, guess what, folks? Liberty Dad has another simple solution. Number one, end the war on drugs. Done. Decriminalize all drugs. I think it's a health problem. It is not a criminal problem unless you commit a crime to get them. If you break into the house to steal somebody's stuff so that you can sell it and then buy drugs, the stealing was the crime. The buying of the drugs, in my opinion, should not be a crime. Right? So we end the war on drugs. Done. Now you're not going to get pulled over for a bag of weed. You're not going to get thrown in jail for a bag of weed. Mandatory minimums. As a rule of thumb, I don't like those. Now, you could make an argument for very heinous crimes that there's some minimums. There's like if you harm a child, like physically harm a child, I could be easily convinced on a mandatory minimum for that, right? So if it's a very egregious crime, I'm good with that. But for everything else, nope. I want to judge accordingly. If we're just going to keep the story that I had earlier. If you are a Black man, you break into my house and you steal my stuff and we catch you and we're in court and we find out that you stole it and you can show receipts that you stole it and bought stuff for your child because their birthday was coming up and you can somehow show that this was out of the ordinary and you just really wanted to, you're not off the hook necessarily. But that should be considered differently than if you were just like, man, that's a rich white dude over there. I'm going to steal his stuff and I'm going to get some money for some weed. That's an entirely different story, right? And I want to treat those slightly separate. So I don't want mandatory minimums for those. Because one was a total disregard, where one was you could call it a mostly disregard, right? But there's some sympathy to be had, I think, if somebody does an evil deed with a good intention, if you will. If and I know people are going to argue, they'll be like, "Oh, is it really a good intention to steal and give some?" What I'm saying is, if you're trying to do a good thing and you can't, and then you do a bad thing so that you can do this good thing, that should be part of the equation. It doesn't mean that you get off, right? You still owe restitution for stealing somebody's stuff, for damaging their property. But I think there's a different story to be considered there than somebody who just wantonly steals your stuff so that they can have something that they wanted that has nothing to do with any kind of goodwill, right? There's like, so I'm okay with getting rid of mandatory minimums except for heinous crimes. And then they got the stopping and arresting. I oppose stop and frisk. I don't think you should be stopped and frisked. If you are stopped, an officer should have reason to believe that you specifically have committed a crime. If I'm riding my scooter motorcycle, trying to sound cool, okay? Long story about why I have a scooter, not a motorcycle. I'll upgrade one day. But I've got a nice, like burnt orange scooter when I ride it around. And if somebody said, hey, there's a guy on a scooter and he just robbed a store, and then an officer sees me ride by, they pull me over, they have reason to believe that I might be that person because I, in some way, fit the description. But if I just drive by kind of fast, you know, and I kind of like smirk at the officer, there's no reason to pull me over. None. There's no crime there. There's no, you might have committed a crime. So the idea of stop and frisk, like, oh, you might have committed a crime because you're walking while black, I oppose that. So get rid of every last, like all of these, get rid of them with the exception of mandatory minimum, potentially for very heinous crimes. Solved it. I solved that problem. Now, the other one here, where is it here? Prosecuting children as adults. On that one, if a 17-year-old commits a violent crime, I'm kind of okay with treating them as an adult. I'm okay with that, right? So again, it depends. If it's a 6-year-old and they did something, even if it's violent, I'm gonna be like, 6-year-old probably doesn't have any clue whatsoever what they did. They might have been taught some bad behaviors or whatever. We need to treat that way different than a 17-year-old. So it depends on how we define children. So do you see what I'm getting at here? Like some of these problems, we don't need reparations to deal with them because they would still be laws on the books. Like getting rid of giving people money doesn't compensate for an ongoing existing war on drugs or mandatory minimums or stop and frisk. If all of that is still present, giving somebody money because they may have been harmed through one of those policies doesn't fix the problem. You still have a problem. So follow me and let's get rid of them. Let's see. Whereas 1 in 122 Black people of voting age is barred from actively participating in the democracy of the United States, including through disenfranchisement due to felony convictions. Get rid of it. Here's how I believe. If you are determined to be, that you can be set free back into society, you should have, with rare exception, all of your freedoms returned. Now, there's a few where I might be a little bit uncomfortable. But then again, it goes back to, should you be let out? That's a conversation for some other day. But the point being here is, in general, like, let's say you commit grand theft auto. You stole a car when you were 19. So you're an adult. You stole a car for grand theft auto. You went and got yourself a felony. You spent a few years in jail or prison. You get out. You've learned your lesson. Maybe you read some books. Maybe you converted to Christianity. Maybe you didn't. Whatever, right? But you get out and you're like, all right, I'm done with that lifestyle. That got me nowhere pleasant, right? You get out and you're ready to go on. Well, if we've determined that you're not going to steal a car again, that you're good, that you've served your time, you should get your voting rights back. Period. End of story. I support that. In fact, Florida tried to do that, and I raised all kind of hell when the Republicans came in because we voted on it several years ago, and it won by like 66% or something like that. It passed the 60% threshold, and so we're like, all right, great. Felons get their voting rights back, and then the Republicans came in and said, well, and they did some legislative judo. And I mean, you kind of do, but kind of don't. Okay. So, and I raised hell about that because I was like, no. For number one, we voted for it. And we had a mandate. Like everyone wants to talk about a mandate. There was a mandate from the people. We voted on something. And then Republicans showed up to get in the way. Right. So I raised hell about that. You should have your voting rights back. So bam, I solved another one. No money involved. None. In fact, you could argue that some of your tax money could be given back to you. Why? Because we don't have to keep records. Once you're done, we don't have to try to follow you. We don't have to document it. Like there's a whole bunch of things like paperwork and all that good stuff that starts to diminish. In fact, if you look at it and you think about it, if you say, all right, we end the war on drugs, we end the mandatory minimum sentencing laws, we stop and frisk, and then we give you your full rights back once you've gotten out of prison. That's an awful lot of administrative cost that I've just eliminated that you get back into your pocket. And just as a side note, if you're Black and you're watching this show and you're like, yeah, but that's not enough, keep following me. Because you know what? I got a lot more taxes that I want to get rid of. You would have so much money. I could boast stronger than Donald Trump if I got my way on the amount of tax money that you would get back and in your pocket, money that you earned through your hard work. I'm telling you, it would be better than reparations. All right, what do we got next here? We're almost done with this bill. Let's see. So let's go to 18, page 18. Boo, boo, doo, doo. I highlighted a few things, and then I decided I was trying to slim it down a little bit. Whereas the federal government must formally apologize for the state-sanctioned institution of chattel slavery and subsequent anti-black institutions, laws, and practices. Can I just can I ask what I think is the obvious question? Would you suddenly trust government if they apologized? If Trump came out with an executive order and said the United States government formally apologizes to every black ancestor for what their ancestors, their forefathers had and foremothers, I guess, had to endure. We apologize for everything. And maybe he even lists it. Maybe he spends 30 minutes giving a speech and he just lays it out. It's like this, and we apologize for this, and we apologize for this. Would you trust government somehow? Because I can tell you I wouldn't. I don't trust government ever. So, okay. Does that mean they're never going to do a vile thing to somebody else again? No. We got a lot. Governments have a very, very long history of violating the rights of individuals. All of them. Like all of them. Like even HOAs do it. Like I'm just saying. Like this is a constant battle. And I'm not going to trust government all of a sudden. But let's ask some more questions. Would that apology improve black families? Would black people wake up the next day? Let's say Donald Trump gives an apology on Monday. Would black Americans on Tuesday, would they wake up and would they just be like, I feel so much better. A burden has been lifted off me because Donald Trump apologized to the black community. Nothing else has changed, right? No laws have been changed. No reparations. There might be some racist bigots out there that are willing to call me the N-word from behind a screen, far away, like a tough guy on the internet. But hey, I got an apology from the government. Would your family be any better? Would your marriage be better? Would your children appreciate you more? Because I don't think so. Would it improve education scores? Would young black men and women, would they go to school and they would just have this new invigorated desire to learn? Right? Would they be like, man, I love geometry now because Donald Trump apologized to the black community? I don't think so. I don't think that would happen at all. Would anything tangible happen? No. And you know why? Because it's not the perpetrator apologizing to the victim. That's why. If it's kind of closely related, that might work. If you insult my wife and then you apologize to my wife, number one, that's who you should apologize to. You should not apologize to me. However, you could apologize to me and say, look, I've apologized to your wife for calling her a nasty name, and I want to apologize to you. Maybe it's a man. And he can say, I want to apologize to you as a man who, respects his wife and works hard to maintain a good family. And I want to apologize to you. I would accept that apology because I am so closely related. But if it was my neighbor, I'm not owed an apology at all. If you insult my neighbor's wife, right? Now, if you insult them in my house, maybe that's a different story. Like, hey, DL, I insulted this person to their face and I did it on your property. So I insulted basically you because it was your property and this person because they were the person that I sent that mean-spirited comment to, right? So in that case, but it's not very long before there is a distinct separation and no apology owed. So there's no apology owed by anybody in government to anybody living for slavery. Now, I could think of plenty of other things that they owe apologies for. Don't get me wrong, right? Them mofos be stealing our tax money left and right. And they put out regulations upon regulations and they make it harder to do all kind of things. Yeah, I mean, there's plenty that they can, they send our children to war to die and not come home for somebody else's war. Yeah, there's plenty. Don't get me wrong. It's not like It's not like government doesn't have things to apologize for. People in office today for things that they did. They don't owe an apology to people that were not the aggrieved party by somebody who is, also not the perpetrator, because both of those people are dead. They cannot get their restitution. They cannot get their apology. All right, let's see. Page 19. Let's go down here. Oh, this one's a good one. This one's fun. This gets into the nitty. Whereas the federal government has provided compensation and other forms of redress to other communities against which it has committed gross human rights violations, including Japanese Americans pursuant to the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, who were forcibly removed and incarcerated in concentration camps in World War I. All right. Now we're going to move away from this bill review because I want to show you something. Because I've had people tell me this. They'll say, DL, the reason that we should get reparations is because other groups have gotten reparations. Oh, okay. Well, let's take a look. Have you ever considered the eligibility requirements for these things? So let's put that up on the screen. Let's take a look. And there we go. All right, and I'm going to zoom in on this so that you can see it because that's really, really tiny. So there we go. So this is the Civil Liberties Act redress provision. This is from the government. So this is the requirements for Japanese Americans to have received said reparations. So the first part is just definitions. We will skip past that. Let's go right here to subpart B, standards of eligibility. An individual is found to be eligible if they are of Japanese ancestry. Okay, that's an easy one. If you're black and you have and you can show some sort of ancestry to somebody that was in slavery, that would be the first step, right? If the comparison is to Japanese Americans, great. Let's look at what it took for them to get it. Because if that's the measure, then we need to measure correctly. All right. Japanese ancestry. Okay, cool. Good start. Was living on the date of enactment of the Act, August 10, 1988. So they had to be alive when the act that provided for reparations was passed. We're done. There's not a single black person. Well, okay, let me take that back. I'm jumping ahead. We're not done yet. And we weren't going to be. I was just kind of being cheeky about that. Okay, so if we passed it today, then you would have to, I'm sorry, I butchered that one. I got a little bit ahead of myself. If you passed it today, then there would have to be a black person that was alive today and had ancestry back to the slave days. So sorry about that. I got a little mixed up there. All right, so those first two are not too bad. During the evacuation, relocation, and internment period, they were A, a U.S. citizen, or B, a permanent resident alien who was lawfully admitted into the United States, or an alien who, after the evacuation, relocation, and internment period, was permitted by applicable statutes to obtain the status of permanent resident alien. Okay, so basically what this is saying is if you're Japanese and you were alive in 1988 when we passed this Reparations Act, and you were a citizen during the evacuation, relocation, and internment period. So, or if you were a permanent resident alien at that time, who was here lawfully, or you were here as an alien who later went on to stay here long-term legal status. So, in other words, if you were alive during that time. So, in other words, a Japanese child that was born in 1989 would not be eligible for this because they were born after the act. Even though they're Japanese, they were born after the act, and they were not alive during this time when the actual internment happened. So that really pretty much rules it out. What else we got? Was confined, held in custody, relocated, or otherwise deprived of liberty or property as a result of Executive Order 9066, dated February 19th, 1942. So, in other words, you had your rights deprived explicitly because of that order. So you had to be alive. So now we keep increasing the bar, right? So first you had to be Japanese, nice, quick, and easy one. Then you had to be alive when the act was passed. Then you had to be somebody that it was around during and when that was happening, when the internment of Japanese people were happening. Then you actually had to be one of the people that was interned or in some way had your rights deprived. We go on. The following individuals are deemed to have suffered a loss with the meaning of paragraph A4 of this section. And then it goes on basically. So that's your criteria. So if you want to say, hey, the Japanese got it, we should get it. Fine. Are you also willing to follow along the same criteria that Japanese Americans had to go through in order to get their reparations? Because if you're not, then stop using them as an example, because you're just trying to be selfish and take money that doesn't belong to you. Now, I got another one because, as it turns out, people also point to Native Americans. And in my research, I found this to be interesting. So we're going to look at this one real quick because those are the two big ones. I always hear like Native Americans got it and then Japanese Americans got it, right? So check this out. This is so interesting. All right. Return Mount Rushmore in the Black Hills to the Lakota. Okay. All right. Let's zoom in on this a little bit. In 1877, the U.S. federal government unilaterally seized the Black Hills, which contained Mount Rushmore, from the Sioux, a direct violation of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868. How long ago was 1868? Long time ago, well over 100 years. The treaty language stated that these lands should be reserved for the absolute, quoting here, absolute and undisturbed use and occupation of the Indians, end quote. In 1980, the Supreme Court agreed that the Black Hills had been unconstitutionally taken. Okay, so 1980, Supreme Court's like, yep, you were wronged, right? This land belongs to you. Rather than return the land, the court awarded the tribes a settlement of $120.5 million, equivalent to the value of the land at the time it was stolen. Okay, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, yeah. So now, unlike the Japanese, who had to be specific victims in order to get what they got, we've got a case where the Native Americans, the Indians, they got something for what their ancestors was taken from their ancestors. So now you might say, well, DL, the Indians got it. Well, let's continue. But the Sioux have never accepted that payment. Now, with interest and increased dollar value worth more than $1 billion, declaring instead that, quote, the Black Hills are not for sale. Huh. That's interesting. So the two biggest examples that I always get are, hey, the Japanese got it. Well, the Japanese specifically had to be somebody that was put into a camp or otherwise detained or had their freedoms taken from them as a result of that executive order. Otherwise, they weren't eligible. So you weren't eligible if you were born later and you were like, yeah, I could have been a millionaire, but my dad was interned and had all these things happen to him and his business went down. And so then he had to start all over, which made it harder for me. Nope, you didn't get that. And then if you look at the Native Americans, well, are you going to follow the Native Americans where they said, we just want our land. We're not trying to get bought off. They're trading off $1 billion and they would just rather have the land. So would Black Americans say, well, I would just rather have my 40 acres, skip all the money. I just want the 40 acres that was supposed to go to me. Is that going to be enough? Because honestly, well, I don't know how much acreage there is, but there is a lot of federal land. And if people were like, hey, let's divvy up this federal land and just give it to Black Americans, like walk through a process, could probably go with that. I mean, it depends on the details, but I might be willing to go with it. So I don't think it's worth using these two examples because the likelihood is that in transition is over. The likelihood is that you're simply not going to be willing to fall into the same criteria or do the same things that they did. Right? So stop using them as an example. If you're not going to go all the way, don't half-ass it with me. All right, let's take a look back at this this PDF here because there's one more. All right. Whereas the federal government abdicated its responsibility time and time again to adequately acknowledge and provide redress for the crimes of enslavement and the continuation of racial subjugation, and never enacted resolutions formally apologizing for slavery. Or H.R. 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act. I already reviewed that in episode 38. I'm not going to tell you all again. I'm just going to play the clip for you. So we'll pretend like this is a somewhat intermission, but instead, why am I so weird over here? There. So, I see, because I closed it, because I shrunk it down. Okay. So let me play this clip, and you will, because you're basically going to get two bill reviews. We're going to do a refresh of the bill review for HR 40, since this current bill references it and they would like to pass it because they've reintroduced it. Well, okay, I'm going to rehash my prior work for you. So let's do it. Let's see here. Is that the one? Yes. Here we go. Today, I review HR 40, Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. This legislation was introduced in the House on January 3rd, 2019 by Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas, and it currently has 173 co-sponsors, all Democrats, and it's 14 pages long. In Section 2, Part B, this bill defines its purpose, saying, quote, "The purpose of this act is to establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans," end quote. There's something interesting that I'd like to note about this bill, and that is much of it is dedicated to reviewing history and making proclamations. For instance, in Section 3, Part B1, it outlines the duties of the commission this bill establishes. Here's what it says, quote, "Identify, compile, and synthesize the relevant corpus of evidentiary documentation of the institution of slavery which existed within the United States and the colonies that became the United States from 1619 through 1865. Then in Part B2, it says this: "The role which the federal government and state governments of the United States supported the institution of slavery is in constitutional and statutory provisions, including the extent which government including the extent to which governments prevented, opposed, or restricted efforts of formerly enslaved Africans and their descendants to repatriate to their homeland," end quote. Here is the very interesting part about that. Like the two executive orders signed by President Biden that I reviewed in previous episodes, this piece of legislation doesn't itself offer anything of substance. Keep in mind, the very first line of this, it says, "A bill, quote, to address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 colonies between 1619 and 1865, and to establish a commission to study and consider a national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery," end quote. A national apology and reparations may sound like a wonderful idea to many. And who would oppose addressing fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity? The problem with this bill is that it doesn't guarantee any of that. The only guarantees are that a commission would be formed to review this information. Furthermore, this bill, it authorizes the appropriation of $12 million intended to study and produce a report 1 year after the members have their first meeting. What I find most interesting is that under Section 2, titled Findings and Purpose, this bill makes some declarations. Here are some of the things that it finds. Number 1, 4 million Africans and their descendants were enslaved in the U.S. and its colonies between 1619 and 1865. Between 1789 and 1865, the Constitution and various laws permitted slavery in the U.S. Number 3, slavery deprived Africans life, liberty, citizenship rights from their own countries, cultural heritage, and denied them the fruit of their labor.
And number four, an overwhelming amount of documentation exists proving the effects of slavery linger on today. It then goes on to list a few more items, all of which are widely known and primarily mostly accepted, with one exception being the degree of impact of slavery that exists today. Reparations are not a guarantee. A national apology is not a guarantee, nor is there any guarantee regarding any change in current law. The only thing that is explicitly guaranteed in this bill, should it pass, is that a group of people will be formed to spend $12 million to look into it and make some recommendations. If you think this is still a good step because it may lead to something, you may wish to start reviewing more legislation and the follow-up and what comes of the government spending. At the beginning of this bill, this bill review, I pointed out that this bill has 173 co-sponsors. Compare that against Senate Bill 3955, introduced by Senator Rand Paul back in June of last year. That bill, known as the Justice for Breonna Taylor Act, would ban no-knock raids at the federal and state level. 8 months later, it still has the same 2 Republican co-sponsors and not a single Democrat. No studies, no maybe reparations, and no hopeful national apology. Signed today, and no more no-knock raids tomorrow. And by the way, do we really believe the President of the United States really needs to spend $12 million before he issues a national apology? If he really wanted to do it, he would have.
All right. So now you know what HR 40 is about. It's about spending $12 million and you get some recommendations. Basically, it's the government version of, hey, you got those TPS reports? That's what it is. It doesn't provide anything of value. Like they could say, well, we spent $12 million. And another point I want to make, we just walked through 20 pages of whereas clause. I mean, we didn't walk through all of the whereases. You could go and look at them and read them yourself. All this information is already known. Why are we spending $12 million for information that they compiled, for the most part, in whereas clauses? We don't need to spend money to get nothing. If the government is going to spend your hard-earned money, you should get something for it. You know, it'd be one thing to make an argument and say, and I know libertarians are going to hate me for this, it's one thing to say, hey, we need to tax you so that we can build roads. It's quite another thing to say, we're going to tax you so that we can study some information and create some reports and send them to the president. And maybe we'll deal with this past horror that happened in our country. That's unacceptable. It should be unacceptable for everyone. All right, let's see here. This last one is great. So it says, whereas the federal government should provide free education to students attending historically Black colleges and universities who are committed to serving Black communities, provide monetary incentives to local school districts that adopt and implement a curriculum on the history of of African descent, and ensure that the Department of Education provides and supports educational programming that comprehensively and deliberately encourages the incorporation of lessons and curricula on slavery and its vestiges. For who? What is this for? How is this going to benefit? I mean, do you think, well, I mean, let's be honest. I'm talking to the Black folk out there. If white people learned more about slavery, do you think that you would see them as less racist? If you think white people are racist now, for whatever reason, they got white privilege, they just don't like Black people, microaggressions, whatever. If you're of that line of thinking, would the fact that a white person just learns more about slavery in school, would that make you go, I appreciate white people so much more now? I'm going to tell you what the answer is. The answer is no. No, you would not. It's not true. How do I know it's not true? How can I make such a claim? Because if you feel a way about somebody else, we as human beings, whether you're white or Black, we want evidence to support. If somebody steals from me, let's say the neighbor kid comes over to play with my son, and I find out that repeatedly he has stolen stuff from our house. Before I let him in again, I'm going to want some sort of evidence that his parents have dealt with the problem and that it's not going to be an issue again. And initially, even though they might say, hey, we took him to counseling, we reprimanded him, we did this and that, we made him, cut the grass and earn some money. Here's some money in restitution, blah, blah, blah. I'm still going to be like, but is he going to do it again? Like, I'm going to want, like, that's going to be a good step toward that, but I'm still going to be apprehensive about it. Now, if that kid just watched some YouTube videos on stealing and how wrong it was, am I going to be convinced? No, I'm not. I'm not going to be like, oh, you just watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos on why theft was wrong. Come on in. Totally trust you. The same way. No way. That's not how humans operate. That's how I can make such a statement because I've observed people in general, and there is a consistency to people. Now, are there people that might be suckers and they'll be like, okay, he said he was sorry? Yes. There are always people that are willing to go a little bit further than maybe they should. But for most people, if we harbor ill feelings about another person, if we think that another person harbors ill feelings about us, we're going to want a little bit more than that. A little bit more than just, oh, they learned some education about slavery. And by the way, have you ever looked at school scores? They're atrocious. The reading scores are at like reading and math proficiency by the time you're like in 12th grade are in like the 30s and 40s. That means 30 or 40% of people that graduate are proficient at their grade level for reading and math. So let me ask you, black folk, with that kind of with those kind of scores for reading and math, you sure you want white people learning about slavery in school? Like, do you want them to have a 30% proficiency in the history of slavery and the history of black excellence? Is that what you want? Because that sounds like a waste to me. If people are going to learn something, they might as well learn it well. Like, why bother at 30 or 40%? But that's what students have for existing things that the school has had many years to work out. So perhaps like, this is the same thing I tell Christians, because Christians will be like, well, I just want them to teach Christianity because this is a Christian nation, right? And I go, you sure you want them to teach Christianity? You really want them to teach the Bible? How would you like somebody to have 30% proficiency at understanding the Bible because they learned it in school? You cool with that? Is that what you think God wants? Basically an illiterate, follower? A follower that was taught incorrectly or taught so poorly that they might as well have been taught incorrectly? Is that what you want? No. That's a terrible idea. But I'm not saying the idea of learning about Black history is bad. I think it's great. I like learning about history all the time. And there are plenty of Black people from history that white people would appreciate. Plenty of them, right? So go find them, make documentaries, YouTube videos, do things where when people watch them, the likelihood of them walking away with increased knowledge, like a significantly increased knowledge of whatever it is that they just watched or consumed, is high, right? Because look, I'm going to tell you right now, if you are a Black person, and you just grab your phone and you sit it right in front of you, like them TikTokers do, and you just say, all right, every day, I'm going to create a video about Black excellence. And then you're like, did you know this person did this and this person did this and blah, 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 blah. And you spent 5 minutes. You, Black person, who maybe you have your GED, maybe you graduated high school, maybe you went on to college, maybe you have a PhD, whoever you are as a Black person, if you just tell accurate information on a 5-minute TikTok video, you will spread more knowledge to non-Black people about Black history and Black excellence than you could ever hope for in the school. And it would especially be the case if many Black people were doing that. That's if you like I'm all about it. Like I would watch some of those videos, make them interesting. I mean, there's a lot of videos out there. It's a lot of competition for my time, but make interesting videos and I'll watch them and I put money on it that a lot of white people would too. You make them interesting. You don't make it like, oh, boohoo, woe is me. You guys are bad. You need to apologize. Just get straight to the meat and be like, well, did you know about this black person? Right? In fact, let's talk about that real quick. Um, let's look at a video because in that it said that free education to students attending historically black colleges. Is that a good idea? Let's take a look at this video here. Make sure I got the right one. Yeah, this one is it. Boom.
Just for the record, we will all file bankruptcy and we will all go back to school. You're not getting a dime from us. What? I have 3 degrees.
Wait, what? 3 degrees? Not 1, not 2, but 3? Disregard for a moment that this particular woman is talking about not paying her loans. We already talked about that in a different episode. Just think about that for a second. 3 degrees. She has 3 degrees. She already has 3. She's more educated than I am, formally. I don't have a single degree. I mean, I technically have an associate's. Does anybody really consider that a degree? No, you don't. Let's continue.
I'll go get another one.
Another one.
I'm a black woman. Black women are the most educated populace on this planet.
Okay, let's assume that's true. Why do we need to give black people free education? Sounds to me like this woman is already saying that the education is already there. Not a problem. Don't need to give them, give the black community free education. They're managing to figure out how to get it.
We go to bed, wake up, and decide, okay, we're bored. Let's go get another degree.
Oh, okay. So you get a degree because you're bored. I mean, that's cool. Don't get me wrong. Like if you want to be a perpetual student, that's cool. You should pay for it. But like I think learning never stops. If you're alive and breathing, you should be trying to learn something. Right. And so this woman, if she really woke up one day and she just said, man, I'm bored with my life, I'm going to go and get another degree. Cool. Have at it. I wish you luck. I think that's a great thing. If that's what you want, like clearly it's not off limits. I mean, if this woman's got 3 and I got 0, well, I mean, she's already ahead of me. And if she's already talking like, I'll just go get another one. Now we can have a conversation about paying your bills. It's a different story, right? And you can skip all the racist tropes. We're only talking about one person here. I know plenty of black people that would never say such a thing, right? Plenty of good black people that would be like, look, I pay my bills. Okay. So, but the point here that I'm trying to make is like, you might make the argument that education needs to be free if we were just coming out of slavery, because people wouldn't have anything, right? They literally were slaves. Everything that they were doing was for the wealth and the benefit of somebody else. I mean, at best, they might have a few coins if they got lucky, right? Maybe they got a donkey, but they probably got pretty much nothing. So in that particular case, you could make the argument in that moment, but that was well over 100 years ago. Now we're at a point where you can go get a loan. You can go get a job. You can go and get an education, and you can utilize that education to advance yourself and to advance basically your family. So there's no need. The other thing I want to point out, you know what? I just realized I wasn't even on the screen. That's okay. That's funny. The other thing that I want to point out, and I've talked about this before, and I'm just going to briefly mention it. M Street School. It was a school that operated for some like 80 years. They consistently put out high quality students. Now it's now known as Dunbar High School, but it was once upon a time called M Street School. Operated in DC for like 80 some years, and it was they had like 3 white counterparts. So this was back, I don't remember the dates, but this was back when segregation was a thing. This was back when white people didn't need an N-word pass because they could use it at will and they didn't have to worry about getting in trouble. Okay. This was back in those times, back when it was acceptable to be a racist, back when the government not giving money to black schools was considered acceptable and they just had to deal with it. Okay. Well, guess what? They were able to produce student after student after student that did very well. And some of the, like, I can't even go into all the stories, but there's a bunch of stories and it's fabulous. It's amazing. You want to talk about learning Black history, Black excellence? Go look and read into that school because they did it. Yet they were consistently underfunded. And the people, the students that went there came from homes of modest means. So these weren't the few wealthy Black people that you might have had. Nope. These were all people that were like regular, everyday average workers, right? Might be some plumbers in there. So who are some of the people that came out of that? Well, so we want to talk about Black excellence. Mary Church Terrell, suffragist and civil rights activist, and one of the first African-American women to earn a college degree. She went to M Street School. Frank Coleman, professor of physics. Kelly Miller, an African-American mathematician, sociologist, essayist, and newspaper columnist. Vincent C. Gray, former chairman of the Council of District of Columbia and mayor of Washington, D.C. Eleanor Holmes Norton, delegate to Congress. Robert C. Weaver, first United States Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Charles R. Drew discovered blood plasma and was the first Black surgeon to serve as an examiner on the American Board of Surgery. And then the last name I've got, Vernon Davis, NFL tight end for the Denver Broncos. Now, what's really cool about this list, a lot of times when people talk about Black excellence, they're like, oh, NBA or football? But did you notice what happened here? Out of how many names were there? Let me count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Out of 8 names that I just grabbed, out of 8, only 1 was in sports. The rest were in achievements that had to come through academic means. So they got their education and they went very far. Like, think about this. You had a mathematician and sociologist and essayist. Like, that requires a good education. You don't become a mathematician just by showing up and getting your GED. Same thing for the professor of physics, Frank Coleman. He's a professor. He's teaching other people about physics. Okay? These students came from M Street School. If you go back and you read the book Up from Slavery with Booker T. Washington, he details the effort, and he went through some crazy effort to build schools. They had to build their own schools in order to teach Black people how to read and write and other things. And some of the students had to build them. So like some of them would walk great distances. Like we always joke about, like, you know, our parents would say, like, when I was your age, I walked 6 miles just to go to school. Back in that day, that might have actually happened. Like on the for real. Like Black people might have been like, all right, time for my 6-mile walk so I can go to school. And the first thing I got to do when I get there is help work to build the school. Then at night, after we're all tired, then I can get my education. Then I can walk back or stay there or whatever. Right? So against the odds, Black people have excelled. You don't need reparations. What you could use is government getting out of the way. As I pointed out, some of the things that I pointed out in that bill, I would support, which aren't really listed in the way that I'm saying. Like, I'm going further. They're like, hey, the FBI had this COINTELPRO, and I'm like, get rid of it. Bye. Gone. They're like, okay, well, you know, we get pulled over while we're Black, stop and frisk. End it. Okay, well, you know, I was walking down the road and I had a little bag of weed in my pocket because, you know, I had a free day and I figured I'd just go and just relax by the lake, get a little high and chill out. But I got arrested, thrown in jail. Now my life is all topsy-turvy. End the drug war. End it right now. We won't have that problem. Hey, man, I committed a crime. I was foolish. I've wised up. I sure would like to vote. You can have your right to vote back. I'm already, without spending a dime, making life better for Black Americans with my ideas. Like they would. Like, I'm not actually doing it, but my ideas, if implemented, they would. In the video that I played, where I talked about the no-knock raid bill, that would go toward making Black America. I prefer to say Black Americans, but Black American lives better. Like I said in that video, day one, you sign the bill on Monday. On Tuesday, lives are already better. We can make lives better for everyone in this country, and we don't have to spend a dime. We just need to roll back government. This is the essence of libertarianism. So if you're Black and you're watching this and you're like, where have all these ideas coming from? They're coming from libertarian values. And I'm telling you right now, whatever money you might be able to get would be far inferior to the ideas that I promote. Promise it. I could defend it. I will debate it with anybody. But these ideas will take you much further. And how do I know this? Because I can look back. You want to talk history? I can look back in history and I can see where Black people were excelling despite some of these things being in place, despite racism. Like, people might say, oh, whites are racist or people are racist today. That's nothing compared to 100 years ago. 100 years ago, you could say the N-word and get away with it. Like, I see people all the time, like, the debate comes up and people are like, how come we can't say it? Right? And then all the Black people trot out, who is it? Who's that guy? And he's like, just say it. I'm trying to think of his name. I can see his face. But it's that he's on like a television show, like some news show, and he's like, just say it. I'll say it with you. And then the white guy's like, no, I don't want to say it. Right? Like this debate comes up all the time. You could freely say nigger at that time to a Black person, and they would do nothing. And a lot of Black people today will be like, just say it and see what happens. Like some Black people will say, just say it if you have to. Geez, get it over with. Other Black people will be like, I dare you. Right? Let me tell you something. When Black people excelled, when you see some of these things, white people could say the N-word to your face and you would do nothing. And yet Black people could excel. If not you, but if the Black community could excel under those circumstances, how much better could they excel today? Think about it. Think about it for a minute. I think the Black community is capable of some great things because history shows it. I just told you, mathematicians, physicists, all these other, and there's plenty more. Like the M Street School operated for 80 years. There is a lot of Black excellence that came out of that school. We could just spend an hour or two probably talking about it. It's fascinating. I challenge you to go read up on it. You'll be amazed. But keep in mind, that happened when people could do and say some of the meanest things to you. And yet you had Black Wall Street. Now I get it. People got deputized and they destroyed, and every one of those people at a minimum should have went to jail. But you know what? That wouldn't happen today. If there is a Black neighborhood, there is a Black neighborhood, but if there was a Black neighborhood in Jacksonville that was doing really well, and all of a sudden today, in 2025, me and a whole bunch of guys went over there and started just killing people and burning down the buildings, we would go to jail. And if some Black folk were armed and shot us, put some holes in us, and we died, there's a strong possibility that they would go free. How do I know this? Breonna Taylor, sitting in her house, or she was laying in her bed sleeping. I think her boyfriend was sitting on the couch, heard somebody just kick in the door. He grabbed his gun. He shot an officer before he realized, oh, these are officers. He shot an officer. Now, as a rule of thumb, that's not a good idea for a Black man to shoot a white officer. That's bad news. But what happened? The city settled with him. He got like $2 million. Not only was his case thrown out, he got like $2 million. And he didn't even get shot. His girlfriend did. So I want you to think about it. We live in a vastly different society today. Are people still racist? Yes, there are some people that are racist out there. Do they have the power that they once did? No, they do not. And because of that, when I look back at history, I say I should see even greater things than what I can find during a time when people were absolutely permitted to be horrible. All right. That's my show for today, folks. I'm not really seeing any comments in here to address, so I'm just going to get to that closing, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for joining me this evening. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.